Hello, and welcome to another episode of Wheel of Horror, the podcast where two best friends spin a wheel once a week. It chooses the horror film and they discuss it. Today, we're talking about 2017's Life, which was directed by Daniel Espinosa. I'm your co-host, Alec, and with me today for the first time ever is Mike Molino. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
We go pretty far back. I know we haven't really talked in a while, but I want to say I met you in like 2008 or 9, right?
Yeah, really a long time ago, like college time. So not to date us and make us old, but yes, like 2009 almost. Like I think, yeah, because it's 2024. Yeah, so a long time ago. Yep.
Yeah, because I was good friends with one of your high school buddies and one of my, college friends, Jeff McHugh.
Yep.
He's been on the podcast a while ago.
Okay, cool.
And I want to say you were there for one of the Halloweens, like our first Halloween at Suffolk.
I definitely was. I was because I would come up here for Halloweens and I would, reach out to Jeff and be like, "Hey, what are you guys doing? You guys would throw parties all the time and stuff." So that's when I met you, and
Yeah.
that's, the origin of our horror history, I guess we'll say,
I know, geez, that's so long ago. It's crazy now.
a long time ago.
Yeah, and now you live in Boston, which is awesome. So,
Yep.
and you're from Connecticut, so hey, spooky area to grow up, just like me.
Yes, yes. Nice haunted state.
Yeah, and you grew up in like Watertown, right? That area?
Yeah, I'm like maybe like 10, 15 minutes from there. It's like the northwestern corner of Connecticut. Yeah. So, in the burbs with all the cemeteries and dead silence at night after like 7 p.m. So, yeah.
Okay, so one thing I just found out about like within the last year, which I cannot believe I didn't know about in Connecticut, and I want to know if you've ever heard of it, is Dudleytown. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have.
Okay, how far were you from that? Because that's kind of in that area, right?
I mean, everywhere in Connecticut's at least, maybe a 30-minute drive.
Right, right, right.
But like, yeah, I haven't heard about Dudleytown in a long time. I do remember them saying that it had some like weird, paranormal stuff going on and whatnot, right?
Yeah, it's closed down. There was like a bunch of people that died in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and now it's sectioned off and people can't go. And it's apparently a very still dark forest with a lot of mica rocks that makes it like shimmer. So
Yeah.
it's spooky. Yeah, there's check out the videos on YouTube. They are like you're like, God damn, I live that close to that place. Like what the hell?
Yeah, right. I mean, we obviously have, our own little hometown stories and horror stories and stuff like that. And we also have Ed and Lorraine Warren are from Connecticut,
Oh,
the
dude.
infamous Conjuring, universe. So, and they would do like campus visits, in Connecticut and whatnot. I forget what town they're from, but they're from like, I think Southern Connecticut, maybe.
It's Madison or Monroe, but
Yeah,
yeah,
something. Yeah.
actually, I had their grandson on the podcast like last year, so he was on. He talked all about it. It was kind of crazy.
It's so wild.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, you can check out that episode if anybody's interested. But yeah. So this is your first time being on the podcast. So what we always like to do with new people is ask, like, what's your history with horror? When did you get into it? Do you have a favorite? I know that's kind of a hard question, but yeah, what got you into horror?
So, I don't know. Like, I've always been into horror basically my whole life, but I got introduced to it because my parents are really big lovers of horror movies.
Uh,
They love Halloween, obviously, and my dad watches the Halloween marathons on the AMC channel when we were growing up all the time. And I remember specifically a couple of times we would watch horror movies before going anywhere or something like that. So one
hmm.
time we were in the Cape vacationing, and I remember I was maybe like 8 or 9, and my parents were watching Psycho
Hmm.
and the original one, like the black and white one.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember being like, "Oh, like, what is this movie?" And they were like, "Well, you can watch it, but like, it's a little scary." And I was like, "Okay." And I just watched it anyways. And like, I found it, I mean, honestly terrifying because we were staying in a hotel. But that was like one of like my core horror loves. And then another time we rented the Blair Witch Project, and then we went camping like that weekend following.
Oh God.
It was a little, yeah, I know, a little sadistic, but I don't know. I grew up with horror and I've been watching it all the time. So now I'm like one of those people who I just throw it on in the background or like watch it if I see something new comes out or if I want to rewatch something that I haven't seen in a while, just to kind of just, I don't know, maybe get that little adrenaline rush, I guess, but also just because I love the creativity that usually happens behind it. And I mean, sometimes the plot's not that great, but it's still fun to watch.
Right.
Like, and one of my favorites, I think probably the original Saw movie is phenomenal. Like that
Mm.
was, I think, a genre launching thing where it became like it really took gore to the next level, but with one of the most memorable plot twists.
Mm.
The Descent is a great film. I watched that for the first time maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and it's like pretty old. I think it's in 2008 maybe,
Yeah, something like that.
one of those early 2000s. And
Yeah.
I don't even know if I could pick a favorite, honestly.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard
It's hard.
question.
There's so many, because you kind of have to divide it up into like the decades that they progressed to, right? Like we started off with like Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, and then it evolved into like the Scream franchise in like the 90s. And then I think like 2000s, early 2000s, 2010, I think were peak moments for horror, because that was when, Saw came out, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the most recent one, the updated one, not the old one,
Right.
Last House on the Left, like a bunch of like remakes that were like not the greatest, but I think they were pivotal in the horror genre because it kind of, steamrolled, I think, a lot of the movies back then. Jeepers Creepers, another great movie. I don't think it's scary, but it's just a cult classic for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could go on and on and on about
Yeah, no, I get it,
favorites, I
man.
guess.
Well, you said something pretty interesting though, about the 2000s, because like I don't love the actual decade of the 2000s for horror. I mean, there's obviously always going to be good ones, but what you
Yeah.
did say about the remakes is very true, and that's kind of what's synonymous with that decade. But in a weird way, it is good because it did bring horror into the mainstream.
Yes, exactly.
For a lot of people that, Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween, like, people love it if they love horror, but this is like, hey, it's a Friday night. What do you guys want to go see? Whatever, what's playing? This. And then all these teens see it, and then they tell their friends, and a whole new people that weren't going to see horror did in that decade.
Yes, and then they become like fans, and they find out that like, oh, this actually came out in like the 70s, or like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't really compare that. But then you end up going down a rabbit hole of all this different material that they have out there, like the Stephen King stuff alone. Like Misery is another fantastic horror movie, I think, and I don't even really consider that horror, but it is, I think.
Oh, yeah, I would, definitely.
The Shining, a classic.
So good.
There's so many that like I even like I'm probably forgetting a ton that are like really good. I think Silence of the Lambs, I think, is probably like my final answer as to like what my favorite horror movie is,
Yeah, it's amazing.
just because of like the storyline, the acting, it's very quotable, and you could rewatch it over and over and over again. And there's the underlying messages of transforming yourself into the thing that you think you should be, and all this stuff, like the psychological points behind it as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it won an Oscar, so
Oh, yeah.
well
Yeah.
deserved. It's one of what, like three, I think, maybe horror films that won an Oscar.
Yeah, and one of the few that's won all five of the top categories, so even for any kind of movie to win that kind of accolade is great.
Yeah, and like Black Swan, I think, is another great horror film that's pretty, like, I guess we'll say modern, but not anymore.
Yeah, I know it's 2010, so it's like when we graduated or went to college, so
Yeah, God,
yikes.
old. Yeah, right. Yikes. Jump scare, my age.
All right, so let's jump into life a little bit. This is I don't know, it's not a Netflix original film, but it was a film that came out in 2017. Dude, I have never even heard of this movie. And then when you
Good,
texted
right?
it to me, yeah, you texted it to me. I looked in, just read the very brief synopsis, saw the cast, and was like, let's go. And very, very impressed. I cannot believe this went completely under the radar for me, though. When did you see this for the first time?
So I saw it like close to when it came out, because
Mm.
they had put it on like the streaming services and stuff. And I'm a big fan of like sci-fi horror. No, I know a lot of people don't really like it, but like again, the original like Alien franchise,
Oh
phenomenal.
yeah. Oh, so good.
And like the Predators, also great.
Yeah.
But so what, really drew me to this movie at first, I was like, oh, Ryan Reynolds and Jake Gyllenhaal, like love them both.
Yeah.
But then I was like, oh, that's weird that this is a sci-fi horror film and Ryan Reynolds is in it.
Right.
But then he ends up playing the typical character that he is in a horror film.
Just himself, like
He's just
100%.
himself. And I loved how they, made him fit into the role so well. But yeah, I just randomly stumbled upon it. Like when you're scrolling through stuff and you kind of give up and you're like, well, I've been scrolling and looking at trailers for 45 minutes. I should just pick one.
Right.
So I kind of randomly stumbled upon it myself because I never really heard anything about it. I didn't see any marketing or trailers or posters or anything like that. So I was like, all right, well, let's just give this a shot. And then I watched it and I had the same reaction you did. I was like, this is something else. Like, it's not what I expected at all. Exceeded my expectations, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't even have any expectations, but this definitely exceeded the ones I likely would have had if I had known more about it. But yeah, I mean, this to me was like if Alien was modern and a little bit more realistic. Like
Yeah.
they find an organism and it just progresses very similar to Alien and it uses humans to kind of grow. But it takes place in, I think, modern times where Alien takes place in like 2200 or something like that. And they've got
Right.
all this, advanced machinery and space technology. This takes place on the International Space Station, which is a real place right now,
Yes, exactly.
which is cool. They work that in the actual NASA and all that stuff. So it's easier for a person to grasp than, 2200, the Nostradamus, the UNSC. Like you're like, what, wait, what's going on? So this is accessible to a modern audience.
Yes, it's very, very relatable. I don't want to say relatable, but you can understand it's like it's maybe a movie for dummies, like a horror movie for dummies, where you're like, okay, like I understand everything that's going on. They find this organism from Mars because they're collecting soil samples. Cool. That's a pretty standard thing. And they don't have any outworldly weapons or technology that we don't understand because it's basically just a NASA movie and they're in space. And it's a very simple direction that they go in, and it's not that hard to follow. But then things kind of take a turn for the worst within what, 20 minutes of the beginning.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't really make it too hard to follow because you can see yourself or see that happening, this scenario happening out in space because it's not something like you were saying otherworldly.
Yeah, no, it's and it starts off with basically Ryan Reynolds has to catch this probe or something that was coming from Mars, and they're like, we got one shot to catch this, and Ryan Reynolds all cocky and doing his thing.
Yep.
He catches it, and everybody's happy, and they do a good job of trying to give everybody their own little character arc. Like, Jake Gyllenhaal, he's about to break the record for being on the space station for the longest of all time, and he doesn't like Earthlings, and he doesn't want to go back and the one guy has a kid at home. I guess that's his arc. Um, the other guy, the doctor, he had a good one where he had that disease where his legs were atrophied or whatever, so
Yes.
he couldn't walk, and he like wanted to do something good for humanity. The Russian woman, I don't think she had much, and Ryan Reynolds, I don't think he had anything other than just being cocky guy.
Comic relief. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did love how they had, each character kind of played their own role because they were a space team, like Space Force.
yeah,
You know,
yep,
what I did really like about this movie is that, how typically in horror movies, people tend to do not the most rational thing. They'll be like, oh, we heard this noise. Let's go down in the basement and look for it.
yeah.
Like in this movie, they're all top of their field scientists and they're very intelligent people. And they're like, okay, let's devise a plan and think about doing this and this. Even when things take a turn for the worse, they still are very regimented and they know or are trying to at least come up with the most efficient solution together, and it still just ends up not really working out for them.
Okay, I agree with everything except for when the thing gets out or whatever. Like,
Well, yeah.
don't they leave the door open, right? Like, or what happens exactly?
Okay, so after Ryan Reynolds tries to go and kill the thing, so they name the organism that they find Calvin because they start the movie off with like, oh, we found this organism. They FaceTime this school in New York, and they decide to let the school name the organism. They name it after their school, like so they name the organism Calvin.
Yeah.
So Calvin goes rogue, breaks the doctor's hand because he's in there just experimenting with it, and then the doctor passes out, the atrophy doctor. Ryan Reynolds goes in, uses a flamethrower to try to kill Calvin because now that they see that he's violent, they're like, we can't risk it. We need to kill it.
Right.
Ryan Reynolds goes in, tries to kill it. Calvin ends up killing Ryan by going into his mouth and, like, I guess we'll say feeding off of the insides of his body because that's what, he uses as food, and then he ends up growing, kills Ryan, and then the CPU ends up overriding them, so they have to manually start closing. There's like these air valves in the ceiling to
Yeah.
prevent because of the flames. Like they're trying to like something with the flamethrower, and they try to prevent it from exploding and whatnot. So that's technically they call it Firewall 2 is the lab.
Right. But even before all of this, though, like there's that one moment where the alarms are setting off when they're sleeping and they all rush down
Oh yeah.
and they're like, you guys got to keep it together or whatever. What happened then? What set the alarm off and made them all go down there? Was it because they thought Calvin died? Like he froze?
Yeah, so because the atrophy doctor, I forget what his name is, he was spending too much time with Calvin because he developed this weird infatuation with it, because he was
Yeah.
trying to find some sort of purpose in life, and this was kind of like his thing.
Right.
So he was down there, and then he got scolded for like, going into the lab and not checking everything before he left. and spending too much time in the lab without enough sleep. So
Yeah.
there was some sort of malfunction in there that made them all go down there. And then there was a lack of oxygen in the lab. And then they thought that Calvin
Mm,
had died,
okay.
but he was just dormant because there was no oxygen. And that led the doctor into going into the lab himself.
And shocking it to wake it up.
Yep. And then he shocked it to wake up, and then it became violent.
It's that doctor's fault that all this
Agreed.
happened then.
100%. He's the catalyst.
You're right. Like everything is so methodical. Once everything goes to shit, they're like, yes, Firewall 2, this is the plan. This is what we're going with. We all signed off on this plan or whatever. But that doctor, yes, you're right. Like his kind of almost selfish infatuation with this thing and wanting it to be his quote unquote like wheelchair. He like, he notes that earlier. He's like the unnamed wheelchair man. I want to thank him, the creator of that. So fuck, if he didn't screw around with it and waste the oxygen and do that, then none of this would have happened. But again,
None of it would have happened.
but let me ask you this. What is the end goal here? Like, to bring it back to Earth or to study it on, because something eventually would have happened, no matter what.
I think they maybe had pretty positive outlooks because they're like, oh, wow, we found something that's the first thing of proof that there's organisms outside of Earth.
Right.
So, I think we all, I mean, maybe not now, but ignorantly, we all hope, there's some sort of higher intelligence out there that will help us scientifically, health-wise, like maybe they have some sort of, extra cell or chromosome that we can benefit from.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think humans as a species are all pretty selfish. Also, Calvin was like this tiny little thing. It was maybe the size of like a mitochondria in the beginning, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Microscopic.
And then it seemed harmless. And then he got too greedy, I think, and was a little bit too overconfident because he would always he made it into a very personal thing right when they named it. Like,
Yeah.
when you say like, oh, you shouldn't name something because then you get attached to it.
Right.
That's,
right.
I think, what happened. And then he psychologically just became so infatuated with it where he almost was protecting it almost.
Mm.
So, I mean, you're right. It's his fault.
Yeah, but either like all I can imagine is, regardless, even if this guy, screwed around with it, broke protocol and was spending too much time with it and all this stuff. Let's say best case scenario, they bring another space station up there and it's the one that's like, okay, this is the quarantine ship where we're going to study this cell and we're going to figure shit out with it or whatever. Instead of getting like excited once they got it and they're like, all right, let's fuck with it. Let's see what it does. Oh, it stimulates this and it reacts to this. Oh my God, it's all eyes, body, and mind. It's like everything. So they should bring another space station up there and do that research on that ship or whatever, like one that's specialized for this. But you can't prepare for this thing because you don't know what it is.
Well, they didn't know either until it was too late. They found
Right.
out that, Calvin could basically survive anything as they find out as they slowly kind of get picked off by him.
Yeah.
He can survive being out in space, even though he still requires food, oxygen, and water to survive, but he makes it work because his resilience is way further than I think they thought was going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that he can survive in space, like he needs to breathe, it's like maybe he's been holding it. It's like, oh shit. Like if this thing it's like a dolphin where it can just like hold his breath underwater and then can come, back occasionally when it needs it. It's like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's basically kind of what he was. He was a violent dolphin. He could withstand anything, right? So when the commander went out there to go check the water, the coolant pumps, right? Because like after he escaped, there were fire alarms or whatever going off, and she went out to go check the coolant pumps, and then he was in one of the coolant pumps because he drank the coolant,
Right.
and then she tried to come back into the station, and he broke her coolant pack on her spacesuit, which I think after rewatching it again was intentional. At first, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, he just like hit her suit and broke it. But I think after learning how intelligent he actually is, I think that was also an intentional thing that he knew that he was going to prevent her from surviving.
Okay. This is kind of the thing. Have you ever seen Deep Blue Sea?
A fave. Yes, of course. When sharks swim backwards with Samuel L. Jackson.
Yes. Okay. So
Yes.
so here's my thing with this movie and Deep Blue Sea. So it's like I can understand how in that movie they're injecting them to make their smarter, like they're making the sharks smarter, so and, so they understand. I don't know whatever it is to be a shark smarter. For this alien, I understand it gets smarter throughout the movie and everything like that, and it understands kind of how to move and how to attract food and light and all that stuff. But the thing is, they still need to have a concept of what like a spaceship is and all of these things. It's like I don't think they automatically understand, okay, these are humans, they're from Earth, they're from primates or whatever. This is a space station.
Right.
Like it knows it's a more efficient predator maybe, but until it's reached a level of like, I don't know, like sentience and understanding and stuff like that, I'm still inclined to think that it's not aware of spacesuits. It's not aware of the space station. It's aware of its surroundings more efficiently, how to be a better hunter, and all of those things. But I don't know if it's intelligent in that way. I could totally be wrong.
I mean, that's fair to say because it could just be trying to survive and you don't know the origin of it or anything, right? But it's obviously used to being an apex predator and doing
Yeah.
anything. I mean, if you think about it, humans would really do the same thing. We try to navigate our lives into doing whatever it takes to survive, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
even when people are stranded in the desert or they're lost in the woods, they will do whatever it takes resource wise, even cannibalism to survive.
Oh, yeah. No, totally. This movie makes you think about that. Like, exactly. Us destroying like a cactus to drink water out of it or breaking down trees to build our houses. Like,
Right.
we're destroying life in order to maintain life. And that's what this thing is doing.
Yeah, exactly. Like people will eat leaves, even though it's not really any of nutrients to us, but like people will like drink pond water that will make them sick, but it's better than not drinking anything.
Yeah, you'll do anything to survive, just like this thing, and just like the humans to a degree, and
Exactly.
in this movie too, and in life. But as you were saying, like when that Russian woman dies from the coolant thing, that also shows Calvin's strength that he can drink the coolant and is fine. He's in open space drinking coolants.
Drinking coolant, right?
Yeah, and then she's in her suit, and the coolant gets in there, and they're like, "Don't drink it; it's toxic," and she dies. But really quick before all this, I was pretty shocked at how early Ryan Reynolds got killed off.
I know.
Is he the first?
Yeah, he's the first.
Whoa. He probably got the biggest paycheck and had to work the least amount of days, I'm gonna guess.
Seriously, right? And it's just, yeah, it was very surprising to me too, because I was like, all right, well, also because you're used to bigger. I mean, I think the other actors were also pretty big, like, maybe not to my knowledge, like Jake Gyllenhaal's pretty big.
Yeah.
And the other woman, like the British woman, she's in a bunch of stuff too.
Yeah, Rebecca Ferguson. She's in Dune. Yeah.
Yeah, and also in The Greatest Showman.
Yeah. Yeah, she's had a good couple years. She's really grown since this movie.
Yes. Yeah, I was also surprised that they killed him off so quickly because usually when you have big name actors like that, they kind of make it through long enough for, when people finish the movie and they're like, oh yeah, like he's in this. Like you could say that he's in the movie because he's in it, but for maybe a half hour.
Yeah, I have a theory. I think the reason they killed him off is they wanted to make sure this isn't a comedy, and they've already set him up as this like comedic relief, and they're like, get rid of him, or else he's gonna
Yeah,
he'll turn into the LL Cool J of Deep Blue Sea.
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think doing that, definitely set the precedent. Like after he died, the movie became even more ominous, I think.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
It really showed that, okay, well, the brave guy of the team didn't make it. So that's like killing off Captain America, and they're like, okay, well, now what hope do we have? So it became a lot darker and more anxiety ridden after that because you end up being like, well, fuck, now what?
Yeah, because it's like an octopus. It like got into this tiny little thing that its body you couldn't think it could fit through. It escapes the room, and then it just starts wreaking havoc. And yeah, and then so Ryan Reynolds is dead, the Russian woman's dead. So now we have Sho, who's the Japanese engineer. We have Rebecca Ferguson, who's in control of the situation. I think she's like the head quarantine officer, or whatever.
Yep,
Jake Gyllenhaal, and
that's it.
no, what's his face? The doctor.
The doctor, yes, he passed out, but he survived, yes. And they try to, do whatever they can again, like you said, methodically try to get rid of Calvin by like he tries to get back into the space station because after he killed the commander, he's just out there and they're like he needs to survive. And like they're really his only resource of like their bodies or they're his only resource of food.
Yeah.
So he's trying to get back into the space station. And I know that they start using the jets because he tries to get back into the ship by getting into I think the jets of the space station. And if they kept manually firing them off one cylinder at a time because they would see the pressure go up and down when he was going into the cylinders. But then if they did it too much, it would veer them off course. But they had to stop. Is that right? I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. They sent out a distress call.
Yep.
And then Calvin, the only thing that I can't remember is how Calvin got into the doctor's suit. Because everybody's together in the room and they're like, waiting for Calvin to attack again, basically. They send out the distress signal and then the doctor starts flatlining and they're like, oh my God, he's dying. What the hell's going on? And they take his suit off and he's in the suit.
Yeah. Wrapped around his leg.
And I can't remember how he got there.
So I don't think they show it. I think they show like a flash of Calvin, like the classic horror silhouette dash across a hallway.
Hmm.
And then they zoom in into the doctor's face and he's like, has this pensive look on him.
Right.
And this is where I think, he became the emotional attachment again, kind of screwed everyone over because he allowed it to happen. Because how do you not see a giant squid-like thing come at your body and go into your suit?
Yeah, it's not like he was under mind control. Like
Right.
I mean, it's as far as we know. Yeah, but that's so fucked up. Like this guy's like, listen, it's life. It's gonna find a way. And it's like, are you just quoting Jurassic Park now? Like you're literally letting this thing get to Earth, probably.
Exactly. I know, because he wasn't as panicked, right? Because like when he was flatlining, he didn't really freak out. He was just like, this is what it is.
Oh my God, yeah.
And normally everyone else is already severely panicked. Like we're at like code yellow at this point, and he's just like, oh, at least we found something. Like, no, dude, you're not going to make it. And, like, I think he knew from my perspective after watching it, just there's no way realistically or logically that Calvin, like this tentacle alien, happened to just flip like up your sock.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. So cool. That's good. Yeah, so Calvin gets away and basically like at this point they send the ship, the distress signal ship comes, but their communications are out and they figure out that this thing is actually coming to set it off course now.
Yes. Yep. To push them back into space.
Yeah, so they have a quarantine protocol, so it's like shit. And then at this point, Show runs away. He locks himself in one of the sleep holster things or whatever, and you think Calvin's gonna get him, and I'm kind of surprised he didn't.
I'm surprised too because he starts crushing the sleep pod, and you see the what you would assume indestructible glass or whatever they're made of. Because like how in Alien they have the sleep pods and they're meant to put someone to sleep for 70 years or something.
Yeah.
And Calvin's continuously growing every time he feeds. So after he fed off the doctor, he grew again, and then like you
Hmm.
said, Show locked himself in the pod. And then he just like gave up, right?
Yeah, I didn't love that.
I think it's because the space station, the rescue team came. Maybe he was distracted. I don't remember specifically, but I think that's why he like went away because then shortly after, Show like gets out of the pod and doesn't make it.
Yeah, the way they killed Show was kind of lame. Like you're like, oh, he hides for a minute, and then immediately once he goes out hiding gets killed. You're like, okay.
Yeah, he sacrifices himself, which is like a lame kill.
Yeah.
But then you see Calvin go and attack the guys who are coming to like push the space station out further because once they attach to the space station, like they're exposed and the door opens and Calvin's there and kills them both.
Yeah.
And then they start getting sucked out into space, like, another good alien reference. And you'd think that it would work because it worked, in the past with other movies, but it doesn't.
I know. That's the other thing. Like, as far as I know, I don't know that much about space, but if there's any opening at all, isn't it just like everybody's sucked out immediately? There's not even like a blink of an eye.
Yeah, no, I think it's like a vacuum. It's because it's a vacuum thing. Like there's no air or anything, so everything's escaping.
Right. So I'm like, no, there's no way anything, including Calvin, would be able to be like, I'm strong, I could hold on, especially not a human. Like with one arm, it's like, I got you.
Right, like hanging on to like a hand railing.
Yeah. It's like, no, no.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that happens, which you're like, okay, it's fine, it's fun, it's a movie. And they come up with a plan where they're like, okay, we know we're gonna die, and this thing is actually going to Earth, so we have to do something. And Jake Gyllenhaal is like, I'll fly the escape pod with Calvin in it, and I'll go into deep space, so it won't come back here, and you can just fly back to Earth. But here's the thing: they only have two escape pods.
Yeah, I guess for what, 6 people?
Yeah, like what is this, the Titanic?
I know, I don't the Titanic had more. So I don't know like what happened there. Maybe they didn't expect to need them, but you would think that you would always need to have some sort of escape route. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That was like I think my one of few like logistical flaws where I was like, okay, well, there's no way that there would be 6 or 7 people on this spaceship for X amount of years and only 2 escape pods.
Yeah.
that only seat one. So I'm not sure what happened there, but yeah, Jake comes up with that plan, like, oh, it's just up two left. I'm going to be noble and do this.
Yeah, because why? Oh, yeah, because it was gonna crash on Earth. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'm just like thinking if there was another escape pod, maybe they could have like jettisoned that one like into space. But I don't know. You probably no. I guess you need to pilot it when you're in there. But anyways, that's what happens. Jake Gyllenhaal, carries what's his face Calvin into the escape pod, flies away, and Rebecca Ferguson flies away. She makes a final log like it's a video game, and she's just like, "Don't fuck with this thing. If you find any more, kill them." Like,
right. It's kind of like how they do in Alien, right? Where they send a final message saying, oh, this is the final survivor of such and such space station. We found an organism that ended up being hostile, blah, blah, blah.
hmm Yeah, but it's like realistic. It's like into a black box, and she knows it's gonna crash on Earth and all this stuff. But yeah, so then I know like Jake Gyllenhaal's fighting Calvin, and like I think what happens is Calvin pushes Jake Gyllenhaal's arm, and it crashes into Rebecca Ferguson, which then causes Rebecca Ferguson to go into deep space and him to go to Earth.
Yeah, so they switch places with the plan because Jake Gyllenhaal says, beforehand, like, oh, we can do this easily if there's no flaws. You can land safely back onto Earth, and I'll just sacrifice myself, and I'll take Calvin out into deep space. And yeah, you watch Calvin like wrap his tentacles around Jake Gyllenhaal's hand, causing the pod to move, and then they just switch trajectories, and you end up finding out at the end that they switched places because the way that they filmed it, right? Like they don't really show it until the end because
Mm.
you watch both the pods, kind of crisscross, and then you see one heading towards Earth and you one going out into space, and then we end up just following the one that goes to Earth, and you watch it land in I think it was in like the Vietnam Ocean or something, right?
Yeah, yep.
And like these fishermen are out there, and then they go up to the pod, and you watch the parachutes come out and the inflatable devices to keep it afloat and whatnot. And then they look into the pod in the little window, and you see Jake Gyllenhaal still alive, but he's surrounded by all this like tentacle goo matter. I'm not sure what it is
Yeah.
because Calvin attacks him before like the screen kind of like cuts over to Rebecca instead. So you think that he's dead.
hmm
So
Yeah.
I enjoyed the twist at the end personally. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, I loved it. No, I thought it was a great little twist. I guess my only issue is I don't know, but I would think that these space whatever these escape pods, they would have a way to like drive, like why couldn't she just turn it around?
I know. I don't know. Because, like, I think they kind of took the cheap way out there where, because you see the screen starts flashing like system failure, but, like,
Yeah.
I don't know how that would have happened because everything was perfectly fine. And then they're like, oh, nope, never mind. You're not going to make it.
Yeah, so I mean like I understand Jake Gyllenhaal getting forced by Calvin to crash into Earth, but I'm like, why couldn't she just kind of like, okay, fuck, he hit me, but I'm turning around now.
Yeah, right. Like, you use, like, they have in space, they have like the little jets that push you into a different direction because there's no
Yeah.
gravity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how that happened, but watching her get catapulted out into space, you just hear her screaming no, and she just gets smaller and smaller and smaller is wild to me.
Yeah. And also the scary thing is, and I don't know how this works either, but the escape pods, like you have a 70% chance of landing in the ocean. And what if you land in the middle of the ocean? Like they're so lucky it landed anywhere near land.
Yeah, anywhere like that, someone saw it.
Yeah, because he wasn't controlling it at this point. So it's like he's hoping it lands somewhere, and it does land right next to Vietnam. And you're like, really? Okay, we got very lucky, but sure.
I know.
And hopefully it's based on every other alien movie ever, water or air or music. Something will kill it immediately, but who knows? Hopefully Calvin doesn't destroy Earth, but they lead you to believe he will.
I know. I kind of wish that they had a post credits kind of scene to see where like we'll say the aftermath of what happened, but I don't even
Yeah.
know how they would go about because like Calvin would just continue to grow.
Yeah, I know. It'd be like Godzilla, like eventually
Yeah,
it's Mothra or whatever.
right, exactly.
But dude, thank you very much for introducing this movie to me and thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It gives me, more reason to watch even more horror.
Hell yeah, man. We'll definitely get you on in the very near future. And yeah, hopefully you can pick another movie I've never even heard of, but I end up really enjoying.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you very much for listening into our discussion on life, and we will see you tomorrow with something.